Hello there, welcome to Cool Talk. Today we talk about Europe in the 19th century, 100 years of revolution and the rise of nationalism and liberalism. Now it seems incredible today that back then the notion of democracy was a bad word, sort of like communism is today. But the people in the 1800s had already experienced the French Revolution and they wanted some peace and quiet, but there was no going back. We start on April the 1814 at the Council of Vienna, where the great European powers all got together with representatives from all over Europe to discuss what to do now that the Napoleon era was over. They were going to redraw the borders of Europe. This was unprecedented. It was like everybody was there. Prince Metternich of Austria, Tsar Alexander the First from Russia, and representing France was Charles Talleyrand, a French diplomat, a very shrewd politician. Listen to this. He had joined and then betrayed the old French regime. He joined the revolution, betrayed the revolution, but he kept his head. Then he joined Napoleon, but then he betrayed Napoleon, and he was still around. And here he was at the council, and he convinced everybody that it wasn't France that had caused all the chaos, it was Napoleon. So he convinced all of them to go easy on France in the negotiations. If you look at this map, this was Europe during the years of Napoleon. All this was about to change. Nations such as Belgium and the Netherlands, the Rhineland, the Sardinia Kingdom were put around France, and they were backed up by Prussia and Austria. All of this to keep France in check. The Council of Vienna also saw fit to reestablish the House of Bourbon. The House of Bourbon at one point had monarchs in Spain, Naples, Sicily, and Parma, but they lost all of that in the French Revolution. They were now about to regain territories and control of Naples and Sicily. The House of Bourbon is an interesting family. This is Philippe VI, King of Spain today, from the House of Bourbon. Tsar Alexander the First proposed to have a holy alliance. Well, the European nations pleased him. They joined together and they formed an alliance that would get together periodically to discuss the situations in Europe and to avoid future wars. These countries were Russia, Prussia, Austria, Britain, and later on France. Now, you can say that nationalism is the political independence of a group of people that share language, custom, culture, and they choose to have a political institution, a nation. Liberalism in those days was suffrage, voting rights for men with property, along with civil rights, freedom to speak, write, and to meet, equality among men. Well, these European monarchs didn't want any of that. No nationalism and no liberalism. We're going to talk about Germany right now. Germany at the time was actually a confederation of 39 German-speaking states, all created by the Council of Vienna. The European monarchs at the time had implemented the emancipation of the Jew. Now, what this meant was that Jews would have equal rights, they would be equal citizens. Well, the people rebelled, and in Germany, they implemented what was called the Carlsbad Decree. This was a decree, an act that banned fraternities and removed liberal university professors and censored the press. In Britain, the land crops were underdeveloped. There was a famine going on. Wages were low, unemployment was high, and people were broke. 60,000 to 80,000 people gathered in St. Peter's Field in Manchester. They demanded representation in Parliament. Now the troops were called out and the cavalry charged into the crowd. When it was all over, 18 people had been killed and between 400 to 700 were injured. Now, if you think that after this horror that the British government was going to go easy, think again. Instead, the government passed laws that led to even more suppression of British rights. Prince Metternich and the other leaders of the great powers stated that they could intervene if there was issues in other countries. Well, in Naples, there was a revolution going on. So with support from Russia, the Austrian army entered Naples and squelched the rebellion. In Spain, there was a revolt. King Ferdinand VII was taken down from power. Metternich demanded that France get involved. So the French armies crossed the borders, and restored King Ferdinand VII back to power. Now, what was interesting was that these great powers, this alliance, suggested helping Spain recuperate all the properties that were lost in Latin America and to help it in its continuous warfare with Simón Bolívar, the revolutionary leader in South America. Now, can you imagine if Russia, Austria, Britain, and France would have helped Spain fight Simón Bolívar? Well, it didn't happen because Britain was, by that point, trading with South America, and it didn't want that disrupted. Greece rose up, seeking independence from the Turks. Now, France, Russia, and Britain, who hated nationalism but hated the Turks even more, decided to help Greece. So, they went ahead. Greece became independent by 1830, and a few years later, Belgium would become independent too. In France, in 1820, King Louis XVIII's nephew was murdered by a fanatic, and royalists demanded that the king reduce the liberties of the people. Enough of all this talk about man's rights. Well, the king gave in. And when he died in 1824, his brother became the new king, Charles X. And Charles was an ultra-royalist. He wanted to go back to the old days of absolutism. But when general elections were held, many liberals gained positions of power. King Charles X wanted to call for new elections, but the people rebelled. And during the rebellion, the army refused to shoot at the crowd. Charles X fled to England, and his relative, Louis Philippe, was put into power. He gave many rights to merchants, bankers, and industrialists, but the working class was neglected. Now, Britain was probably nervous when Charles X got there. The British up to that point had avoided revolutions and violence. With the political parties of conservatives and liberals like the Whigs and the Tories, they were doing okay. But the country was on the brink of revolution due to all the famine and low wages and unemployment. So once again, the British avoided insurrection by introducing the Reform Act of 1832, laws that increased the electorate, gave more representation to the industrialized citizens, not just landowners, and later the British would abolish slavery, forbid child labor in mines and textile mills, and reduce the workday to 10 hours. And then came 1848, the year of revolutions all over Europe. In France, Austria, Italy, Venice, Rome, Hungary, Germany, Prussia. It was quite a year. So let's begin. Quickly now. King Louis Philippe of France had angered the middle class. He favored the rich. When the middle class asked him, what could they do to get more representation? He said, get rich. So riots broke out, there was revolution, and the king fled. France was once again a republic. A provisional government was formed. Then civil war broke out, and Louis Napoleon was elected president. Now, Louis Napoleon was a nephew to Napoleon Bonaparte. In Vienna, Austria, crowds burst into the imperial palace, and the government agrees to an elected assembly. Prince Metternich runs away in disguise. Hungary separates from the Austrian Empire. Then the Austrians were driven out of northern Italy. Venice and Rome declared themselves free republics. Pope Pius IX flees. The King of Sardinia declares war on Austria, but now Austria retaliates and retakes Venice, Rome, Sardinia, and Hungary. There were rebellions in Germany, and a confederation drew up a liberal constitution for a united Germany. In Prussia, a rebellion was suppressed. All of this in 1848. It was quite a year. I believe the European monarchs were glad when it was all over. Now, when Tsar Nicholas in Russia was seeking rights to protect the Christians in the Ottoman Empire, he wanted to influence the region. France and Britain disagreed, and when Russia invaded Moldavia, the Turks, supported by France and Britain, declared war on Russia. And because most battles took place in Crimea, it was called the Crimean War. And after 3 years of war and over 600,000 deaths, Russia lost. And it was a humiliating defeat. It lost its rights to have warships in the Black Sea, and that was right by its southern borders. It also lost the region of Bessarabia, which was ceded to Moldavia. These two regions together would later constitute the country of Romania. Back to France. In 1851, President Louis Napoleon arranged a coup, and then became elected Emperor of France and took up the name Napoleon the Third. Now, as emperor, he expanded the railroads, improved the navy, built wide streets and boulevards, monuments, parks, squares, buildings. If Napoleon the Third had been content with that, he would have remained emperor for a very long time. But like his uncle before him, he had many ambitions. He believed it was his destiny to do much, much more. Napoleon III decided to intervene in Mexico. You see, in Mexico, the Mexican president Benito Juarez owed money to many European nations. So France decided to not only get its money back, but to take Juarez out of power and put in a puppet emperor, the Austrian Archduke Maximilian. And so it was that a monarchy was established in 1864, and Emperor Maximilian I began his reign as the Mexican king. But Maximilian still had to fight Juarez and the Mexican forces. His wife went out there to try to get support from other allies and to raise money. The U.S. sent help to the Mexicans, and in 1866, the French army withdrew, abandoning Maximilian, who was caught by Mexican troops and executed. As for his wife, she suffered an emotional breakdown and possibly went insane. Then Napoleon III, fearing the power of Prussia, declared war on Prussia and began the Franco-Prussian War. Well, this ended with Napoleon III being captured, and he was exiled to England. The Prussian Empire was now the strongest power in Europe. In Italy, the Confederation of Italian republics and kingdoms slowly united, fighting wars with France and Austria. By 1870, with help from Prime Minister Cavour and the revolutionary leader Giuseppe Garibaldi, Italy had united. Austria and Hungary became a dual monarchy. They had one king, but two parliaments. Ireland took an interesting path. The Irish resented paying taxes to the Anglican Church. They also resented the political control of England. Well, the Anglican Church tax was abolished, but the struggle continued until 1922, when the Southern Catholic Irish obtained self-rule, while the Northern Presbyterian Irish remained under the United Kingdom. And on it would go as countries would stumble along, getting reforms, constitutional monarchies, and new republics. By 1915, the map of Europe looked very different than it did a century earlier. Yet there will still be conflicts and tensions that would lead to World War I. We're going to talk about all of that in future videos, but for the moment, our next video is going to go to the United States. We're going to examine the whole 19th century American history, especially the American Civil War. But until then, this is Cool Talk. Comment below, or better yet, subscribe. Thanks for watching.